Manager here at NISM under the Community Engagement Bureau, and welcome to Communities Can Be Language Ready During Emergencies. We're really happy to have you with us right now during our National Preparedness Month. We've been doing a series of different webinars throughout the month, and we're happy that you're here to join us on one of many. We're almost nearing the end of the month, so excited to have you guys here. So I just wanted to run through a couple housekeeping items. If you cannot hear the audio, please comment in the chat. I'm hoping that it's working now. We had Salvatore mention that he wasn't able to comment, but we have some people on tech who can take care of that. If you have any questions for the presenters, please type those in the Q&A box at the bottom of the page. We'll be answering everyone's question at the end of the webinar. And also, if you have any questions to send to us directly, we'll be providing our email address for you to do it in that way also. For any technical issues during the webinar, you can type those in the chat box or the Q&A, and any of us meeting hosts will be able to answer one of those for you. And we also have the closed captioning option. So if you hover your mouse over your Zoom taskbar, you should be able to see that there's a CC button for closed captioning, or it can, depending on your Zoom version, it can also say live transcript. And I wanted also to mention, it's not on the bullet points here, but we are recording this session, and we wanted to make sure that everyone's known of that. All the resources that we mentioned today will be available after the fact. So as New York City Emergency Management, we have one mission and one goal in mind. We want to be able to help New Yorkers before, during, and after emergencies through preparedness, education, and response. We're able to do this on a daily basis because there are 200 of us dedicated professionals who dedicate our days to responding to New Yorkers' emergencies. And we actually collaborate with a lot of different New York City agencies. So some of them work in office with us. It could be NYPD, FDNY, and we also work with different agencies at the state and federal level. So that's New York City Emergency Management's mission overall. As I mentioned before, I'm on the Community Engagement Bureau. So we do a little bit of something different in the sense that we're working with community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, and we like to prepare them on a daily basis through plans and different webinars such as this one and different trainings. So if you're a community-based organization, we're always interested in knowing your perspectives, and we're always available to meet. We actually share a lot of our information via our newsletter, so we can speak further about that towards the end of the presentation. So in today's session, I don't want to delay it any further. Let me introduce who we have on the line with us. We have Iskra Kilgore, who's the Assistant Commissioner for the Community Engagement Bureau. And we also have Ms. Laura Mckenna, who's with us from Southern Brooklyn COAD. So I will pass the floor to them so they can introduce themselves.
Laura, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation. My name is Laura Mckenna. I am the lead facilitator of the Southern Brooklyn COAD, which is a coalition of nonprofits in and around the Coney Island Peninsula. And I'm also the marketing manager for Neighborhood Housing Services of Brooklyn, a nonprofit housing organization that assists anyone in the New York City area with first-time home buying, foreclosure avoidance, home repair, grants and loans, insurance counseling, and a host of other services. So thank you for having me today, NISM.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Iskra Kilgore. I'm the Assistant Commissioner in the Community Engagement Bureau. I'm also the Language Access Coordinator for New York City Emergency Management, and I have been in this role for 9 years, or over 9 years now. And my role in language access is to make sure that our agency is prepared to meet the language access needs of New York City residents during emergencies, and also to help the city coordinate language access services when there is an emergency. And back to you, Emily.
Thank you so much. So additionally, in our session's agenda, we're going to talk about the language access resources and tools that we have available, as Iskra mentioned. And we have Ms. Laura Mckenna, who's going to take the floor first for us after I mention our objective on community partner and community action that can be taken. So community and faith leaders will be learning in this session how to make every effort to make information available and accessible to all New Yorkers, regardless of their English proficiency. Language access should be incorporated and addressed in all emergency response. So without further ado, I'll pass it along to Laura Mckenna, who will introduce community actions.
Thanks, Emily. And hello again, everyone. This presentation that we are doing today was originally presented in a summit of community-based organizations back in June with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And the reason that we offered it is because language is so important in New York City, and there are tools that are available. However, a lot of people at nonprofits do not have the background to be able to communicate with all the different language groups in the footprint in which they operate. So what we want to talk about today are the kinds of emergencies that you might come across where you would need to be doing some kind of mass communication. So this is not one-on-one communication where we're going to try to help you translate when you speak with a client. That's a different webinar. What we want to talk about here are the kinds of communication tools that are available to you if you, for example, we are in hurricane season, and if you are in an area where you may need to or want to alert your clients, your staff, that there is an incoming hurricane, there is official messaging that comes from NISM that you can use in English as well as in other languages to inform your staff and the public. But then there are other kinds of things that happen which are highly localized and that you have to do on the fly, and you have to make up your own messaging. So what I really want to make sure you walk away with today is a feeling that you are empowered to translate into other languages with confidence without feeling like you have to speak that language at all, because the tools are available to you, particularly in the most commonly taught languages in New York City. So let's talk for a moment about why we need to send messages in languages besides English. And what that really has to do with is the diversity of languages within New York City. Of the almost 3.2 million households in New York City, 48% of them speak a language other than English at home. And I emphasize that word speak, not write, not read, speak. Of New York City adults who are 21 and older, 25% do not speak English well, 40% did not complete high school and they read below a 9th grade level, and also often day-to-day English communication falls to children in the household. We see this often, for example, in doctor's offices where kids are pulled out of school to go with grandma to the doctor because grandma does not speak the language of the doctor's office, and the child will translate. And we need to understand that communication should, in other languages, ideally is in written form, but also that there are tools available to us where it can be spoken. So what languages are we talking about in New York City? Well, there's a fabulous map that was done back in 2014 by a woman named Jill Hubley. And what Jill did was she took all of the data regarding languages spoken at home that was reported via the American Community Survey, which is a big survey that a lot of nonprofits use to pull information, or did pull before the census in 2020. And what she did was she created maps with layers, which is, she's a data visualizer, which basically means she takes all these numbers and she crunches them and she puts them into a picture. So what you're seeing on your screen now is a picture of what the languages are that are spoken in New York City when you remove the layers of English and Spanish, which is the second most commonly spoken language in New York City. So you can see the mosaic that arises when you drill down a bit. So some of you may see the footprint, in fact, you probably see the footprint in which your nonprofit or organization operates. And you can see here that there may, within your footprint, be some surprises in terms of languages that are spoken as the third most common. But then you may also feel a little sense of panic that there's nobody on your staff who speaks whatever this other third language is. Maybe they don't even have a speaker who speaks Spanish. So that's one reason why it's important, is because we do have this kind of diversity. So let's take a little bit closer look at the boroughs of New York City. The most commonly spoken language in most neighborhoods of New York City is either English or Spanish. And you look all the way down at the bottom here, this green, you can see that in southern Brooklyn, in Brighton Beach, and also in Coney Island and Sheepshead Bay, in that area, they speak Russian. And you can drive around and you can see a lot of signs in Russian, and you hear Russian everywhere. So if you want to study Russian, it's a great place to get some listening practice. So beyond that, the second most commonly spoken language in these various boroughs, you can see here by the colors, are not only English and Spanish, but also French Creole, coming out of the Caribbean, Yiddish, spoken by the Orthodox Jewish community and others within the Jewish community, Russian, and Chinese. Probably some of this isn't necessarily surprising to you. But as we go a little bit further into the third language, now we're talking, besides English and Spanish and Chinese, which you might have expected, and Russian, now we're seeing Polish, Italian, French Creole again, Yiddish, Punjabi, Albanian, Bengali, French, Arabic, Korean, Greek, and the African languages of Kru, Igbo, and Yoruba up there in the Bronx. So I don't know where folks are from. I don't know if our chat is working or not, but I wanted you to take a little bit closer look at the maps of your borough so that you might get a better idea of languages that are spoken, in case you were not aware. This is a map of Brooklyn and Queens, and as you can see, the second most common languages there are Chinese, Creole, Russian, and Yiddish. The third most common is where things get pretty interesting. And a lot of times what these are they're micro communities or they're hidden communities. They may not be people who are documented. So we need to make an extra effort as CBOs to reach out to these folks, because we are the trusted messengers. There's often great suspicion of the government. And so it's our voices that they will be more likely to listen to, especially in an emergency. So here you can see the list, and I had read them off before, and I'm not going to go into that, but take a look at Staten Island. The third most common languages, and maybe this is a surprise to you, it was to me, are Arabic, Russian, and Italian. There was a big movement of Italians out of Brooklyn and to Staten Island some years ago, but Arabic and Russian were a surprise to me. And then coming back up to the Boogie Down Bronx and Manhattan, here we're seeing the third most common languages are Chinese, Russian, French, Bengali, Italian, Albanian, and again, Kru, which is, those are African languages that are spoken in parts of Liberia and the Ivory Coast. So that's the backdrop against which we are operating. So the question now for us, the challenge, is where are we going to find reliable content to amplify if we have the tools to amplify? And again, we do have those. Oh, I buzzed past my page. Well, it's important to know that New York City Local Law 30 requires that all New York City government agencies translate public-facing documents into 10 different languages. Those are the most commonly spoken languages in addition to English. And that they must also provide telephone interpretation in at least 100 languages. And I'll show you how this actually plays out on these government websites, because the availability of these translations will be what we use for messaging. So the three tools that I'm going to talk about right now are the Notify NYC app, telephone app. It's also a website. The language toggle on all those New York City government websites where you can see the 100 languages, and Google Translate. So Notify NYC is an app that I hope everybody here has downloaded to their phone. And if you don't, it's a really good way to be getting alerts with regard to what's happening around emergencies in areas that you specify you are interested in receiving information about. It's important to have this app on your phone personally, to have your family members have it, to have your coworkers have it, and for your clients to have it. And for us to develop a culture of preparedness within these different spheres of influence that we have, those concentric circles from family to work to community, so that we can try to get as many people on the same page with regard to disasters and emergencies happening in real time as possible. Because the enemy, when bad things start to happen, and we saw this during the pandemic, are rumors and unreliable information. So we want to be getting our information from reliable places like New York City Emergency Management, and we want to amplify that as the trusted voices within our communities. But it starts with us personally, our families, and our jobs, where next time you have a staff meeting, introduce this, encourage people to download it, just like we're doing in this webinar. So here's how to download the app. I'm not going to go through this, but I am going to show you some features of it. You can go to this website, nyc.gov/notify-nyc. You create an account. And again, you encourage coworkers to also download this, teach it to your clients. The important thing to know is that you can change the language in which you receive alerts. Okay, so these alerts are going to start coming up on your phone from whatever areas may be the impacted areas, and regarding whatever types of emergencies and disasters you specify you want to hear about, and in whatever language. So moving on, again, you can set 5, I believe it's 5, it could be wrong, could be 6, 5 addresses within the Notify NYC app that you're interested in. So personally, I have my home, my job, my husband's job, where my sister lives, and where my sister-in-law lives. Those are the 5 places I'm most concerned about knowing if something is happening. And that is whether it's something wide scale or it's a plane crash on 7th Avenue, which actually happened decades ago. And as you can see here, the notification preferences that you can get are, oh, I don't know why that just appeared like that, sorry. All different kinds of emergency types, whether it's transportation related or school notifications or public health, weather, whatever, you can choose what you want to hear about. And much more reliable than Citizens app, where there are a lot of false alarms and where there are a lot of rumors that float around. So what I would like you to see here is when you sign up for Notify NYC to receive messages in English, what you can see on the desktop is what you see here. On your phone, these are going to appear as individual messages, right? headers that you can explode to get more information. But here, for example, the first one is a flood advisory. So let's go back to the fact that New York City websites have to have at least 10 different languages available on their public-facing websites. That includes Notify NYC. So here is the Notify NYC website, and as you can see, if you can read these languages, you're going to be able to get messaging. Anyone can get messaging in English, French, Italian, Haitian Creole, Korean, Polish, Russian, Spanish, Arabic. I don't know what that other language is. I think the other one is Urdu, Bengali. I'm not sure. Somebody from NYC is going to have to tell me what some of these other languages are. But once you choose what that language is, and I chose for this example, Spanish, you're going to see that all those notifications now are in the other languages that you toggle to, that you change to, okay? So if you, as someone who is doing the social media, for example, for your organization, and something happens, right? There's, for example, a flood advisory, and you want your community to know about this. What you can do is you'll get that alert on your Notify NYC. You can push it out in English, but then you can also toggle to whatever language languages are spoken in your area. And in this example, we're going to say it's Spanish. And then what you can do, and you do have to set this up in advance, but you can cut and paste these notifications as posts to social media. So for example, with this flood advisory, right? I belong to many ridiculous number of groups on Facebook, because Facebook groups can be hyper local, right? Very, you know, what people are interested in is what's happening in the neighborhood. So you have a lot of neighborhood groups. You join them or join them under the rubric of your organization or agency. And once you're a member of the group, and that sometimes takes a little bit of time, so you want to do this in advance when nothing is happening during what we call blue skies instead of gray skies. Get set up, and let's say your clientele is Spanish. What you can do is you can cut and paste this notice about flooding. And then I, for example, belong to a group called Mexicanos in Brooklyn. So I can just, with confidence, not worrying if I'm going to make any typos, not worrying that my Spanish is not the greatest, I'm not fluent. Maybe I don't speak Spanish at all. Cut and paste it and drop it in as a post right here. You can add, if you want, you know, a picture of flooding to kind of be more eye-catching. But if you're really in a rush and you have a very important message and you want to push it out, you have to go to the right people in the area who speak the language, and you have to speak their language, and that's how you can that's how you can do this with confidence. Again, that language toggle on all those New York City websites. I'm going to go now to the NYSEM website. You saw on Notify NYC that they will put that messaging in 10 or 11 different languages. Well, if you actually go to the New York City Emergency Management website, and let's say you want to try to pull together some messaging around putting together a go bag, or what to do during a heat wave, or how to get ready for a winter storm, and so forth, you can go and pull that information from the NYC Emergency Management website, and you can pull it in other languages. And I've marked with in yellow here where that toggle is. And by toggle, I mean, when you click that, you're going to get a drop-down menu, and it's going to show you the 100 languages. So you can select the 100, you can select the language that you want to get a translation from, and then you do just what you would have done with Notify NYC. You're going to cut and paste that information into whatever kind of document or posting or e-blast or whatever it is that you want to do. Okay, here I've done it in Spanish, and you can see that everything on this page now has been translated into Spanish, with the exception of the video, which and so there's not, you know, it's not completely seamless at this point on these sites, but the way through is you can see that everything is in Spanish except in red, hurricanes don't wait, neither should you prepare today. If you click that video, it's going to take you to a listing of that video in various languages. So that's where you can click it. It's all this stuff is loaded to YouTube. You can basically just cut and paste that that link and then put it wherever it is that you want to put it. So moving along then. All right, what if you have to write your own message because there's something very urgent that's happening? And I'll give you an example. There was a fire. There was a gas explosion in Bensonhurst about 6 months ago. So really what we want, that's a community that has a lot of people who speak English, but also who speak Chinese, who speak Russian. And then we have a lot of newcomer Ukrainians also. Ukrainians, by the way, they speak Russian, so you can use Russian for them. When I wanted to message into those Facebook groups in Bensonhurst in multiple languages, what I did was I wrote that, let's say, hyperlocal message. This is not an example of that gas explosion. This is actually regarding an evacuation. But you can drop this into the website translate.google.com. And I would add a caveat here. Translate.google.com is not the same thing as going into Google and typing translate, and then some boxes pop up and you drop in, you know, I want to go from English to this other language. This translate.google.com is much more powerful, and I'll tell you why. Because here you see, for example, the governor has ordered everyone on the Coney Island Peninsula to evacuate immediately. That's my message that I want to push out. I can translate it immediately into Spanish, not only as something that I can do in written form, but this page will also allow me to get a recording of that phrase in Spanish and save it, right? So there's no evacuation order right now, but maybe there will be. Don't listen, but maybe there will be. It would be better for me not to have to write these when time is of the essence, and instead to have a battery of possible messages that I can anticipate might come down the pike if there's an emergency. Type those things into Google, into translate.google.com, and then I can save them. So you can have a whole list of different kinds of messages in other languages that you can use if there's an emergency, okay? And you can get those recordings also. And recordings are a beautiful thing because you can use those recordings with websites like, and I'll show you the link to this at the end. It's called text-em-all.com, text-m-all.com, where you can do robocalls. You have to pay a little bit of money. It's about 6 cents a call. But what I do is I can go into my database. Let's say for this gas explosion, I can go in, I can pull from my database the affected zip codes. I have right there what the phone numbers are, and I can do a robocall to those people in that zip code, in that language, and I can either send them a text with this printed form, or I can send them a recording. So again, I don't have to speak Russian to do this. I don't have to speak Chinese. Probably will never speak Chinese. But we are empowered because of this. I'm empowered and you are empowered to do this kind of work. Okay, so if you want to save these translations and recordings, again, you do that at the bottom, and you'll see on your page that it will appear kind of as a library off to the side. Okay, so then those are our three tools. Notify NYC, that language toggle on all those government-facing websites, and translate.google.com for both written and auditory messages. So when you write messages, it's important, again, to go back to what we said at the very beginning, right? 25% of the population that does not have English as their first language, they don't speak English well. A lot of times you have to have children who are doing the translation. So it has to be understandable perhaps to them, right? Parents going to hand the phone and say, what does this say? The kid has to be able to understand that. And plus, it's important because sometimes people can read it in another language, but they need really what they call high frequency, common, plain words. So don't use the highfalutin word if there's a simpler way to put it. Define the purpose of your message, right? There is a snowstorm is coming. We're expecting a heat wave until Sunday. We are under hurricane warning. That's your purpose. That's why you're sending this message. So include that as part of it. Only include important and direct and relevant information, okay? Keep your sentences and your paragraphs short. Nothing complicated, nothing with 2 clauses, nothing with however and otherwise and rather, none of that stuff. Break all those into 2 or 3 sentences. Use an active voice, okay? Take money with you if you are evacuating, or rather take money with you when you evacuate. Not money should be taken. That's the passive voice, okay? We want people to be taking action. We use the active voice. And then just don't use any crazy fonts when you send anything and when you post to social media in another language. And especially when you do it in English, because I've studied a couple of other languages besides English. I've studied some Arabic and I've studied Russian. And I can tell you, if they use any kind of script, I'm lost. I can't even get started. And I'm sure that's the experience of many people who don't speak English and are trying to read it. So to wrap up, even with these tools, we still need to network with each other. And the reason for that is quite simply that to the extent that we are more connected to each other and we are more connected to government and other nonprofits and other resources, frankly, the better our chances are of surviving. And that's why we're talking about emergency communications, because it really gets down to getting people critical information just in time. And we're dealing with 637 languages in New York City. So it's really vital that we make an effort to try to reach people where they are. We can't reach them in all 637, but a lot of these folks speak some English, they speak some other language, their neighbor speaks some other language. We have a shot at it if something happens. And I just wanted to share this. This is an organization called the Endangered Language Alliance. Just to show you, besides that graphic, all the different languages that are spoken, where they're spoken, which languages are spoken, and just the variety is unbelievable, really. It's like no place else in the world. And on a somber note, it's important also, I don't know where my text here went, but this is an illustration of that terrible fire that happened in the Bronx, the Twin Parks fire that took, there was a 5-alarm fire. It took the lives of 17 people, 44 people were injured, 32 of them seriously life-threatening injuries. And this was a community where they spoke mostly they were from mostly Gambia, and they spoke African languages that are spoken in Gambia. So it's also important because these things happen and we want to be able to communicate with people in those languages if it's at all possible, or at least get the word out. So it's only by establishing network with organizations like us, pulling together, closing ranks, and leaning on other organizations that have the expertise that that our own organization does not, that we will truly strengthen the readiness of our community for disasters and emergencies. But in the meantime, we do have those tools. So this is some resources that we'll share with you later. And I just want to make sure that you had a screenshot of this. because not only is this information about languages available through the US Census, but included here are links to getting set up with Notify NYC, Google Translate, guidelines from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and the Office of Adult Education on writing with plain language, mass texting and robocalling, that's that website, Text Them All I told you about, and so forth. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I'm turning it back to Nysum. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, so much, Laura Mckenna, for that very, very thorough description of language access and your experiences utilizing them as a community leader. Right now, I'm going to pass it over to Iskra Kilgore as she continues some conversation about language access data.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a great presentation on how the community can use resources that are widely available to them. I also want to continue the conversation about how important language access is in New York City. Emily, you can go to the next slide. Because Laura went through a lot of the demographic information. This is just some data that we use, which is the latest data that we have on language in New York City. Obviously, we are very diverse, and it is impossible for an emergency to happen in New York City and people with limited English proficiency to not be affected. We see it all the time, and that's why it's important for us in government to be prepared to provide services in languages other than English, and also for the community to be prepared, because we know that you do provide a lot of services and also a lot of information to your community. So we want you to be able to do that. I think Laura mentioned this, the most commonly spoken languages in New York City are Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese. They're grouped in one for the purposes of this survey, and Russian. And also Bengali emerged as number 4 in the recent years before it was Korean. So we are seeing some demographic changes. Also, it's worth mentioning that the population of people with limited English proficiency has been declining slightly in the past several years. That being said, it is still a very high percent. It's about 21% of people who are 5 or older who speak English less than well. Emily, you can go to the next slide. So this language access law 30 is the law that we in government follow to provide language access services to New Yorkers. I have to say that the law has some good provisions, but there are also other things that a lot of agencies do outside of the law to meet the linguistic diversity of the city. But as a bare minimum, all agencies, city agencies, have language access coordinator, and that is the person responsible to make sure that the agency is able to provide language access services to the populations that they serve. Every city agency should have contracts for language access services, and that can include telephonic interpretation, in-person interpretation, translations, and other contracts. Recently, especially during COVID or after COVID, video remote interpretation became very popular because obviously during the pandemic, it was very difficult to provide in-person interpretation. So these are types of contracts that city agencies may have. Also, every agency should have their language access protocol public on their website. So if you're curious about what is NYPD doing about language access, or DSS, or any other city agency, you can go on their website, type in the search engine language access protocol, and read it and understand what they're prepared or what they should be doing. Our language access protocol is also on our website, and I can post the link in the chat after my presentation. And maybe the most important provision for language access in this law is that city agencies are required to provide interpretation and translation of critical information in the 6 most commonly spoken languages in the city, plus the 4 emerging languages. They're called emerging languages based on DOE data. So basically DOE looks at families who are enrolling kids in schools, and those are the top 4 languages that this law adds to the 6 most commonly spoken languages in New York City. For the purposes of the law, these languages are Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Korean, Bengali, French, Urdu, Haitian Creole, Polish, and Arabic. I think I got them all. I got all 10 here that we are required to provide language access services in. I have to say, in emergency, it doesn't work like that many times. So Laura mentioned the horrible fire that happened in the Bronx in January. Obviously, none of these languages were covered by local law 30. But we still provided interpretation in, I believe, 6 or 7 different languages, such as Mandingo, Soninke, and so on, that was spoken by the community that was affected by the fire. So although there are provisions for just 10 languages in an emergency, we really try to be inclusive to the extent possible and provide the services in the languages that are spoken by the community that is affected. Next slide. And the way we do that, we actually try to do a coordinated approach as part of our mission in emergency management is to actually coordinate city agencies and to make sure that services are provided in a coordinated way. We are not a service providing agency, we are a coordinating agency. And as part of our coordinating role, there is a language access task force. The lead on this language access task force is the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, who is the lead on language access for the city in general. And we bring in agencies that are working on an emergency to make sure that services are provided and that policy decisions are made in one coordinated body versus each city agency making their own decision. Next slide. And these are some resources, and I believe Laura already mentioned some of them. Obviously, the Notify NYC program, which is available in 12 languages in addition to English. We really want the community to take advantage of this program. We issue alerts every day. There's also, I know, by speaking with immigrant communities, I've heard that people are a little hesitant to sign up and give their information to a government organization. That being said, all of the alerts that are available by signing for the program are also available on Twitter in the 12 languages. So people don't have to give their information if they don't want to. They can follow it on Twitter. But I think one of the things that Laura really mentioned that is very important, you as community leaders can take the information that is already translated by this program and disseminate it in your community if your residents are affected by an emergency or if you're working on a particular emergency. We also have the Ready New York guides, which contain a lot of emergency preparedness information that are also available in 12 languages. And you can disseminate these guides in your communities. People can fill them in their own language. We can ship them to you. You can download them from our website. There are many ways to access the information in different languages, and it's really a good and critical information to have, especially as we are in hurricane season. We're actually in the height of hurricane season right now until the end of November. And then lastly, there is the communications card, which is also available on our website and it's free to download. This is our resource if everything else fails in language access, right? In an emergency, we often think about what is our plan A, what is our plan B, and what is our plan C. And in emergency, sometimes if we are planning for catastrophic effects, if we don't have access, let's say if we lose internet connection, things are really bad, we have these emergency communication boards that are basically pictures that people can point and tell you what they need. These are commonly used sometimes in hospitals and doctors' offices. They're used in emergencies. It's a good tool for a community also to have. And again, it's free on our website. You can download it. Next slide. This is a poster, and I want to make you aware of this if you're not already. Every city agency is required to have a complaint process. So basically, if you go into a public, if you're seeking public services, you have the right to free interpretation. And if you're not provided free interpretation, you can call 311 and basically complain that you haven't been provided this interpretation. And that's important for you to know. It's important for your clients to know. This is the poster that we use. Other city agencies have different versions of the poster, but they basically say the same thing, which is you have a right to free interpretation. And if you don't get it, call 311 so we can complain about it. If you encounter this and you don't complain, we don't know that something is going wrong. So it's very important to give that feedback. Next slide. And lastly, just to build a little bit on Laura's message and what you can do as a community, I think one of the most important things and what we have worked a lot with community leaders during emergencies is knowing the language needs of your community. So for example, going back to the fire that happened in the Bronx, initially when there is an emergency that happens, we look at our demographic information in the maps and it can tell us, yes, in this community, there are these languages that are spoken. But every building, every community is a microcosmos, right? And so when the fire in the Bronx happened, we looked at our maps, we saw French, we saw different languages, but a couple of hours later, we heard from a couple of community leaders who actually gave us the list of the languages that was spoken in that particular building, which was extremely helpful. And one thing that you can do, your communities can do, is really look at your community and know what languages are spoken and where, because that is also helpful, especially if you're working on any type of emergency preparedness in your community. It's very important for you to know. The other thing is to know the capacity of your organization. Some organizations have staff who are multilingual. Some organizations have volunteers who are multilingual. And having a list or database of these people and what languages they speak or write is very important. Now, one thing I want to mention is that just because you speak or write a language, it doesn't mean that you can interpret or you can actually translate. So that those are some things just to be aware, but definitely knowing your resources is very important. And then one thing that we mentioned and we talk a lot about in emergency preparedness is just learning the infrastructure of your community and knowing the organizations that are in your community or your network, because it's important to liaise and work with other organizations if you need to ask maybe for assistance, or if you're working on an emergency plan together and knowing what resources other organizations in your community have. And I think that was everything that I had. Emily, did you want to add anything?
Thank you so much, Iskra. I think you wrapped it up perfectly. I really enjoyed the fact that both you and Laura were able to give the audience a full picture of how community and government can work together to provide these resources. And we're just going to go to the next slide. Oh, if it allows me, here we go. And mention all the resources that were discussed. Both Laura and Iskra were able to mention Notify NYC. So I hope if you take anything from this presentation, most definitely amplify this application to your community and allow them to learn all the amazing resources and information that are hubbed in that app. Also, other offices that Iskra mentioned that we collaborate with in terms of language access around the city. And then as the community preparedness team, being able to collaborate with Laura Mckenna here on all this information that is available throughout our city. I will also, I know we're a little limited on time, but if anyone has any questions, we can run through those right now. Either Iskra, myself, or Laura can answer.
I don't think there are anything in the chat and nothing in the Q&A either.
Okay, perfect. So I guess we'll wrap up. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope that this webinar was informational and that you're able to take a lot of the really great resources that Laura and Iskra shared and amplify them within your communities. I do want to mention that all of the information from today will be shared both on our YouTube page. You'll be able to refer back to this webinar recording, and we will send out in a day or two, just give me a little time, a full resource page and contact information for everyone who was on here. So if Iskra or Lara have any final comments.
I would just say, don't think that whatever your experience was with a foreign language in middle school or high school or college has anything to do with this, because you can use these tools to translate and communicate and amplify messaging just the way you can get in a car, turn it on without having to be a mechanic. So don't be afraid. Go ahead and start to use these. And also check your own, if you have an iPhone, Google the phrase, how do I translate with my iPhone? You're going to be pretty surprised what that camera can do. So thank you very much.
Anything you wanted to add, Iskra?
No, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you to everyone again, and we will send out all the information from today. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon and continue to enjoy the events that are widely available during National Preparedness Month. We still have 2 weeks left in the month, so if you go to the Ready New York website or even any of our National Preparedness, we have additional webinars and events that you can take your family, your friends to within the coming weeks. So please refer to those. And like I said, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thanks for joining us today.